Hi folks, this is Gumballs. This video is a tutorial about how to create your loot crate overrides for ARK Survival Evolved. Way back in patch 2.4.2 I think it was, they came out with this lovely command called config override supply crate items, which effectively allows you to override the items in the loot crates that are dropped within ARK. When they produced it, they didn't give us a great lot of information about it. Very vague answers on what the variables did and sort of stuff like that. I basically said, there you go and play with it and figure it out yourself and screw you type stuff. And with a lot of aggravation, trial and error, we've sort of figured out how things work. There are still a few things we don't quite fully understand and they're not answering us of how they work, so we're just going to go through it. Here we've got the sample code of a loot crate system which they provided at the patch. When the patch came out, they supplied this as like an example code. Now if I went straight into it and started explaining or trying to explain what all these variables mean, how they work, and their effect on the loot crate, we'd soon get very confused just because of the naming conventions of these various different variables and whatever, and we would end up back at stage one scratching our head. So instead, what I'm going to try and do instead is explain it by the process of making our own little procedure. And as we're building the procedure up, I'm going to start formatting this side, and as we're building the procedure up over here, and formatting the opposite side, it should sort of relate to it, and you'll sort of get an idea of where we're going to, and hopefully it'll sort of explain it a little bit easier. So there we go. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make my text editor PHP. I've put it in that just because it's easier reading and formatting and structuring and stuff like that. It just makes it a lot easier. So this little procedure we're going to do will get the computer to make us lunch. We're going to get it to go into our kitchen, open all the cupboards, have a look on shelves, pick out ingredients and throw them on a plate, serve us lunch. So the first thing we need to do is give our procedure a name. We're going to call this Make Mystery Lunch. There we go. That's our procedure. Now everything to do with this procedure, Mystery Lunch, is going to be held within these two brackets so that the computer knows from the start to the end of them brackets everything is about making a mystery lunch. So there we go. So the first thing we'll do is tell this procedure which plate to serve our lunch upon. Plate to use equals, and I'm going to use a big round plate. Excuse my typing, I know it's slow, but bear with me. Now, as I said before, I'm going to format this side over here, but I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just going to format it as I'm typing and creating this procedure over here. And you should start seeing some sort of pattern and being able to relate to these variables and all that sort of stuff as we're building over here. So we've got our procedure sat in the kitchen. It's got the plate on the side. It now needs to know where to find the ingredients and how many ingredients to pour on. We've got all our ingredients are inside cupboards on shelves. So you open a cupboard, you've got so many shelves, and you've got tins of beans and I don't know, soups and bananas and all sorts of weird and wonderful things stacked on different things. We've got to tell tell the procedure how many of these cupboards we're going to look into, and then how many shelves, and then pick out a various amount of items. So the first thing it has to need to know is how many cupboards. You know, the first thing you need to know, how many cupboards I'm going to look through. So the min num cupboards equals 1. going to keep this nice and simple. Max num cupboards equals 1. So I'm going to look into a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 1 cupboard to find these ingredients. Now this next variable I'm going to put in is power. Now we're not quite 100% sure how power works. We know it's some sort of multiplier with quality and affects the quality of items coming out, but we don't fully understand how it works and how we can manipulate it. So we're just going to acknowledge it's there, and we're going to keep the base default values for this power, and we're going to keep it at 1. Otherwise you can end up with all sorts of overly powerful ascendant stuff, and it can cock your loot table up to pot. So needless to say, we'll just acknowledge it's there and we'll keep it at the default value. So cupboard power equals 1. So now we've got our cupboard power set at 1. Now if we had multiple cupboards to choose from, and it was selecting 2, 3, 4, whatever, we would have to tell, or the procedure needs to know, can it go back to the same cupboard twice? So it's gone into one, opened it, picked out a leg of lamb, put it on the side. Can I go back in that cupboard and pick something else up? And even though we've got it, at the moment we're only using one cupboard, the variable exists. So even though you've got it set at 1, it's going to open a cupboard, close it, and the procedure's done, you still have to reference the variable. So we're going to say loop in cupboard again. Now it's a true or false statement, this. Am I going to look in the cupboard again? Yes or no. So we don't want that to do. We're going to type in, sorry, true, false, not yes. No. Now normally that would be the end of that statement, and everything's all well. However, in their wisdom, the dev decided to make this a negative statement, and he's effectively done this. He said, don't look in cupboard again. So you have to look at the statement and say, don't look in cupboard again. Is that statement true? Well, I don't want to look in the cupboard again, so that statement is true. If I did want to look in the cupboard again, I would have to say, don't look in the cupboard again. Well, that statement's false, and effectively I'm saying, no, I don't not want to look in the cupboard again. Negative statements, morons, never mind. But needless to say, you have to know that if you don't want it to look into the cupboard again, think of the opposite, because it's a negative statement. Confusing as hell. Why they did it like that, I don't know. So there you go. We're told that we're not going to look in the same cupboard again. So now we've got the basic rules of what is going to what the procedure is going to do. It knows what plate we're using, it knows how many cupboards we're going to look into, and whether it can look into the same cupboard again. So now we need to start defining the cupboards themselves. And everything to do with cupboards is going to be held within these two brackets. Just so everything, we know that everything related in these two brackets is to do with cupboards. Now, whether you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 million cupboards, it doesn't really matter. They've got properties in themselves. They've got shelves in them, they've got items, and they've got all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So all the properties for each individual cupboard has to be held within its own little brackets, like that. So basically we've got cupboard 1 details. If I wanted another cupboard, I'd just put like that. Cupboard 2 details, and so on and so on and so on. Cupboard 3, I'll just do these quick. So, and then cupboard 4 and cupboard 5 and cupboard 6. But for the sake of this one, we're just going to use one cupboard. let me just get rid of that. So we told it we're opening the cupboards, we're going to use a minimum of one cupboard. Let me format this a little bit so it can sort of start relating. So all the cupboard details are going to be held in here. And again, just put these onto different lines. So now we've got to start pouring in our details of our cupboards, or rather the properties within inside cupboards. And in your cupboard, we've got shelves. On the shelves there's items, tins of beans and all that sort of weird, wonderful things. So the first thing it's got to do is it's open the cupboard door, it's presented with a load of shelves. It needs to know how many shelves is it going to look on. What's the minimum number of shelves it's going to look on, and what's the maximum number of shelves it's going to look on. So we'll start with these little variables: min, num, shelves. So this is the minimum number of shelves I'm going to look on. It's 2. And the max num shelves equals 2. So we told it open up a cupboard, and if it opens this particular cupboard, it's going to look on a minimum of 2 shelves and a maximum of 2 shelves. Now, a bit like cupboards, shelves have got powers. Again, not 100% sure how powers work, so we're just going to acknowledge that the power's there, leave it at the default value. So shelf power equals 1. Keep these numbers exactly. I just noticed something up there. Just keep the number conventions exactly the same, so we doesn't cause any confusion. So yeah, the power, we don't know what it does. We're just acknowledging it's there. Keep it at the default, otherwise you'll screw things up. Now the next variable we're going to do concerns the preference. We're just creating one cupboard at the moment, so this variable isn't going to come into calculations. However, if we had 2 or 3, so we had 2 for easier, we only wanted to pick one out of the 2. The computer would then need to know, well, have you got a favourite cupboard, or do you prefer me to look in one particular cupboard compared to another one? If you're not really bothered, then you keep your preferences. Is like, I don't really care, I'll keep them up as the same, yeah, keep them the same. But if you prefer one more than others, like you've got one cupboard with all your lentils and your healthy food in, and the other ones with all your biscuits and your cakes and stuff, then you prefer your cakes and biscuits a little bit more, so you'll put more preference on the cakes because you don't really want to go eating some lentils all the time. So we have a thing now called cupboard. Now this is related to the cupboards rather than shelf. The cupboard preference. And if I really like something, I'm going to give it a maximum value of 1. If I don't like something, then I'll give it a value of less than 1, but never negative. 0. No, 1. For some reason, ARK, a lot of the procedures in ARK, they don't like big numbers. They work off decimal places. Whatever, it just works out. I have used this before, and I've put a big reference number in there, put like 1,000 and all sorts of things, trying to force something to be spawned and things like that, and it generated an item which wasn't even in the loot crate. It just sent it weird and wonderful things. So my cupboard preference, and if I had another cupboard down here, like cupboard 2, this is our lentil cupboard. Oops, hope I don't know. If I had another cupboard down here, this would be cupboard 2, of course, and with our lentils in, we'd put something like cupboard preference equals lentils. I don't know. I'll put 1.5. So of course, if you only pick a 1 out of the 2 cupboards, it is going to pick this cupboard over this. Now in the later videos I'll actually go over these preferences a little bit more in depth and how you can manipulate them and what it means regards chance, but it's a complicated topic on its own. So I'll leave that for another. Needless to say, even if you've just got one cupboard, you still have to reference the variable. So we've got one cupboard, reference, preference of 1. Now then, back to the shelves into this cupboard. A bit like the cupboards we did before, we have to tell if I pick something off a particular shelf, can I go back and pick something else off that shelf again? So Luke on shelf again. Again, it's going to be a true-false statement. So no, I don't want to look on the same shelf twice, because I don't want 2 tins of beans. I want a tin of beans and a slice of bread, and breads are on different shelves and things like that. But again, in their wisdom or lack of thereof, they decided to make this a negative statement. So a bit like this one up here, we have to sort of do the opposite of what we want, or tell it, we have to think in the opposite side. So don't look on shelf again. Is that statement true or false? Well, we don't want to look on the shelf again, so that statement is true. Correct? We don't want to look on the shelf again. Again, negative statements, moronic. So now we've got the basic information of the cupboard down. Just noticed a comma there. That shouldn't be there. Now we've got the basic information of the cupboards down, we need to start talking about the actual shelves themselves and what the shelves hold and all that sort of stuff. So let's tell it we're going to start looking at shelves. And like the cupboards, anything to do with shelves is held within 2 brackets. And again, a bit like the cupboards, if you've got more than one shelf, or if you've only got one shelf, all the shelf details are held within their own brackets again. So you would have shelf 1 in one bracket. If you had another shelf, we would have shelf 2 and another bracket, and then we would have shelf 3, and so on and so on and so on. For this particular example, we are going to stick with 2 shelves. Now let me just format this slightly, and then you might be able to see some sort of pattern coming in again. Bear with me. And let me just format this side over here. Otherwise, hopefully this is taking shape and you can sort of see what's going on here. So just final closing bracket. Just lining all these last brackets up. There we go. So now we need to start telling the procedure what are actually on our shelves, the actual ingredients we're going to use for this this wonderful meal it's got. So the first thing we're going to do, a bit like the cupboard preference we did up here, you can also put a preference to shelves, because you can see we've got 2 shelves. I know we're already relating, we're going to pick both shelves, but if we had that as 1 and this is 2, a bit like the cupboards earlier, do I prefer this shelf over that shelf? So I'm going to put a shelf preference in, shelf preference, type in equals, and again, if you really like something, 1.0. And we'll put the same in again for this one, shelf, why is that not coming up? That's fine. shelf preference equals 1.0. Now I've put these two, even though we're talking about two totally different shelves, I've put these exactly the same, so they've got the even chance. If we had that as minimum 1, maximum 1, it would look at it and say, well, you prefer that one, you could prefer that one, they've both got the same preference, it's a 50-50 split. But again, that's all down to chance and probability. I'll work that in a different video, so just start relating preference to your chance of it being picked. So we've put our preference for each shelf, and the next thing we need to do is to actually tell it what is on the shelf. So we'll put the ingredients are actually on the shelves. So ingredients equals, and we could have one ingredient, we could have 100 ingredients. It's a bit like a shelf. You can have a shelf with just a tin of beans on, or you could have a shelf with a tin of beans, a tin of tomatoes, a tin of spaghetti or hoops or whatever. So there can be a full list of things, and because it's a big list of things, they have to be held within brackets. Even though we're only going to put one item on it, it's still a list. It's just that the list is only one item long, so we have to put that in brackets. And again, let me open the opening and closing, put that there, and I might as well copy that and do the other one exactly the same time. So there we go, there's our list of ingredients ready to be put in. And our list of ingredients, of course, is a string, so it has to go in quote marks, and these are just the name of the ingredients. I'm going to put some beans. If I had more than one item, I'd just put a comma, put the second one in, tomatoes. But for a simplicity, and you just list and list and list, but for the simplicity, we're just going to have one ingredient on the shelf. And of course, because it's one, we don't need a comma in there. Oops. And on this shelf, we're going to have bread, because we're actually going to have something edible. We're going to have beans and bread, beans on toast. Absolutely awesome. Let me start formatting this out while I'm talking about this as well. Now, if we had more than one ingredient on the shelf, we would have to tell it, a bit like we did with the shelf preferences and the cupboard preferences. We need to tell it what the preference of the actual ingredients are. So even though we've only got one, and preference doesn't really matter, but because the variables there, we still have to reference it. So, and because we can have a list of ingredients, we then have to have a list of preferences which will match up to the ingredients. So if I had something like beans and say tomatoes, then I could put something like my preference for beans is 1.0 because I really like beans, and I don't like tomatoes that much, so 0.5. And the 0.1 would relate to the beans, the 0.5, because they come in the same place. Your standard arrays, if you know what those are. If you don't, do a quick Google on it, please. I'm not going to explain. There you go. And I've just noticed a slight mistake there. That should be ingredients preference equals. Oh, okay, so let me format that. Keep the same formatting conventions, and we can copy and paste this. Need to come in, of course. Copy that and put that in there, so it's all identical. And I'll just format this bit over here to hopefully start lining everything up and hopefully making sense. Bloody miracle if it works, this, but we'll see. So now we've got the items listed. We know what are on the shelves. We need to tell the old thing of how many of that particular ingredient we're going to pick. We can have a minimum and a maximum quantity again. So the minimum ingredients equals 10. So we're going to pick at least 10 beans, because there's only one ingredient there, but the minimum ingredients is 10. And the max ingredients equals 10. So we're going to have a minimum of 10 and a maximum of 10 beans selected. So effectively we're going to get 10 beans, because we're hungry. Copy and paste that exactly the same down there. Goes exactly the same for the bread. The minimum number of bread we're going to get is 10. Maximum number of breads we're going to get is 10. And then the next thing it needs to know is if it's generated, now when we're going back to ARK loot, if it's generated something that has got quality, like crossbows, chest pieces, hide armor saddles, things like that, it needs to know what quality to generate it. As an admin, you've spawned things in, you put the quality of like 0 or 1, 5 for ascendants and all that sort of stuff. But even if the item you are generating doesn't have any quality attached to it, like structures, walls, it might be resources like stone or metal or whatever, even though they don't have it, because the variable exists, you still have to reference the variable. So the minimum quality equals 1.0, and I will go through quality and how these numbers actually reflect the quality of items once they're generated in a loot crate in another video, because there are quality multipliers within crates which we can't control. So even if you put in quality 1 expecting a quality 1 item to come out, and you suddenly say, hey, why have I got a mastercraft item? Every time I summon something with quality 1, I never get a mastercraft. It's always like ramshackle or primitive. That's because the crate you are using is probably one of the red drops, or the deep sea loot crates, where it's got a higher level of quality built into the crate itself. So I'll go over that fully in another video, but for now, just know that you have to reference the quality of every single item, even if it doesn't have quality. So the max quality for this, I could put this at whatever, but keep them as 1.0 just to keep your brain in functioning and know what is going to happen. Now, if I had a list of, we've only got one ingredient listed up there in each crate. If I had a list of ingredients, this quality would apply to every single ingredient. Every single, so if we had beans, tomatoes, and what have you, it would reference. So it does sort of limit, if you bear that in mind, it does sort of limit the structure of your loot crates at some point at later end, but we'll go over that later again, like I said. But just be aware, you've got to reference it even if the item doesn't have quality. Now just a couple more variables and our whole procedure is done. Now we mentioned before it's got magic properties and it's got powers because it's a magical cupboard and shelves. Part of these magical abilities is that rather than give us the item, what we've got listed here, the beans and the bacon, instead it's going to say, yeah, you're going to have this for your dinner, but instead of me giving you the items for your dinner, I'm going to give you the directions to the shop to go and buy it. So it's going to say, and it can, we can set it so that it always gives us the directions to the shop. So it's going to come to this going to come to this shelf. It's going to select beans. It's going to select 10 of them, and then it'll say always give directions to shop. Now this is a true-false statement. Do we want it to always give us the directions to the shop? And we don't. So we'll just put in a simple false. We don't want it always to give us. So it is actually going to give. And then we can also say, well, if you don't always want to give us the direction to the shop, you sometimes want us to do. So we'll give it a chance to give directions to shop equals, and this is going to be a number, and basically 1.0 is going to be 100%, and 0.0 is going to be 0%, and anything in between is going to be like 0.5 is 50%, 75 75%, 0.25 25%. And for this particular one, we don't want any chance of directions to the shop, so it will definitely give us the items. Now, if you think about this, actually, if 1.0 is 100%, then we don't really need this, do we? Because if we set this at 100%, then if that's false, we're still going to give it them. So I don't see the point of that particular variable, but they put it in any road, so we have to reference it. So anyway, we're putting it as 0.0. I'll just get rid of this blank line here. And I'll copy that down to here, just to get exactly the same format this, and then hopefully everything is lined up between the two procedures. And if I've explained it correctly, in my mind I think I do, but we'll see what happens with the feedback and stuff. Everything's lined up, so if this is sort of made sense to you, where we've got the cupboards and the shelves and the ingredients, it should tie up with how this is all structured. The fact that they use different variables doesn't really, or different names of variables, doesn't really matter, because we sort of know what they do. You know, this particular variable here, which says minimum number of items. Minimum number of items. Is that the minimum number of items I'm putting into the loot crate? Well, no, it's not actually. It's the minimum number of shelves it's selecting. See the naming conventions, and I'll go through all the naming conventions and what each variable should be means in the next video. It's not going to be a long one. Just go through it and explain things, cross-reference them all. So I'm hoping that this made a bit of sense to you, and you can see how the structure of this loot crate has come together. And next video we'll talk about the actual variables, and then further on we'll start talking about how to add more items into it, how to get your probability of generating different quality items and mix and matching and all sorts of things. So hope the video was useful. Hit the like button, and any comments below please leave, or leave it on the ARK forums. If you're here, you've probably been directed from there, and yeah, any feedback, belting. Cheers. Later.